Let's be honest, there's a lot of noise in triathlon. If you go online, everyone's got their opinion. There's coaches, there's athletes, there's professionals. There's just so much information there. Nutrition, heart rates, power-based training, strength training. Today's different, no whiteboard, no plan. I've asked some of my athletes I coach and the community to ask me some questions. I'm gonna answer them today as best I can and hopefully cut through some of the noise with my opinion and some professional feedback. And it's for those who juggle real life, family, work commitments, kids, and their training, which they're so driven to do in this great sport of triathlon. So tune in, I hope you get some value from it, because if these guys thinking about these questions, there's at least 50 of you with the same questions. All right, I'm gonna read them out literally from my Instagram stories, which I put out about 5 days ago. First question, nutrition for training is expensive. I started to make my own. Any tips? So mate, I love this one. It's something that I thought about years ago because I'm not a huge fan, even though I'm wearing a precision hydration hat because I do a lot of hydration testing for them. I'm not a huge fan of all in with gels and lots of sugar, purely because of the long-term effects of taking that daily habitual. Your body does get accustomed to that. So I actually advocate with a lot of my athletes that I coach, depending on the specificity of the session closer to an event, that's separate. There's things like dates, 3 dates is equivalent of a gel. Nuts are great. These are for long, easier, steady sessions. Of course, you don't want to be doing interval work on chewing nuts. Plain white rice bars, there's different products. You don't have to spend a lot of money, $400 a month, on a load of sports nutrition. It's very expensive, especially in parts of, for example, where I'm from in South Africa. I'm in the UK at the moment, but a lot of the guys have to buy the premium nutrition and it's thousands of rand, so it works into a few $100s, and you know how expensive this works. So you can make things like maltodextrin and fructose powders. You can add your own sea salt or minerals, desert salt. You just got to start thinking outside the box, but you don't have to rely on sports nutrition. It's a big world out there, and actually it's very expensive. So wholeheartedly, I agree fundamentally on that. However, intensity matters, so you just want to have a really good gut when you push hard using those products, so then you can rely on them when you come to your race specific event. So closer to you get to the event, whatever you dial in with race course nutrition and hydration, I urge you to practice that for at least 6 weeks, perhaps even 8 weeks to gut train, and obviously get used to the dosages, because that's really important. Question 2, when do I add race pace work in an Ironman prep and cut the VO2 stuff? VO2 and threshold have their place, absolutely. VO2 work, in the true sense, above your threshold, your FTP, utilizing a lot of oxygen. You tend to have that place earlier in your training in the winter, with sprinkling of threshold probably all year round. 10 to 12 weeks out, that definitely starts to deteriorate downwards, so drop downwards, and you bring up the race specific efforts, which are longer 10, 20, 30-minute tempo efforts, which is probably what you're doing already, the person who asked this question. However, context, if you don't use it, you lose it. So we always sprinkle a little bit of VO2 work in there. It might only be 3 by 3 minutes. So 9 minutes of work with 3 minutes recovery. Thrown in on a bike ride. For the run, it might be 800-meter reps, because we want to keep that fire stimulated. Okay, so we ditch the 30-30s, the 30 on, 30 off. That's more for conditioning in the general conditioning phase in the off season. But the closer we get, we start to decline, remove the high VO2, because it's so costly and you've got a lot of fatigue from the volume, which is, again, really specific for Ironman prep. Okay, question 3, how do I recover properly? I could probably do a whole video on this. Sleep, eat, move, rest, and repeat. How do I recover? Everyone has their opinion on this. I actually did a cool video on recovery not so long ago, probably a few weeks ago by the time this comes out. So I urge you to watch that, and I go into detail with that. I think most athletes, they don't undertrain. I think we all agree that triathletes are pretty driven. They under recover. So they're not nailing the basics really well with timing of carbohydrates, timing of really good quality proteins, whether you're vegetarian or not. And of course, adequate hydration, not just water, but understanding, have you lost a lot of rapid amount of fluid in a short space of time, for example, on a turbo, on a treadmill, or in a sauna. That requires some electrolytes, some sodium to help bring the homeostasis back up in the body, in the bloodstream. So I would urge, first and foremost, you speak to gurus in this area, sleep trumps it all. All the other modalities are nice icing on the cake. Normatec boots, foam rolling, massage, chiropractic. I do all of that when it's required. But if you have a poor adequate fueling strategy, so post, pre, and during a workout, something that we might neglect quite regularly because we just need to get the training done and you pretty much are always on the back foot. Can you relate to this? I certainly can. And then prioritize at least 7.5 to 8.5 hours in bed, whether you're asleep for that. That's another chat. Some people just require a little bit more sleep, especially younger athletes, but the old athletes I find aren't requiring as much sleep. Generally, once you're talking about 55 onwards, 60, we tend to not actually feel like we need as much sleep. You just need longer days between the sessions that are quite taxing to recover. But now that means active recovery, walking, swimming, non-loading. It's a complex area. It's very individual, but I'm glad you asked that question because that's probably, if you're not tracking HRV, sleep quality, resting heart rate, you're just guessing. So you're not prioritizing the key things. That's not rest. That's just winging it. So prioritize it like you prioritize your FTP. Question 4. You're still with me. What's the best helmet for Kona in the heat? I think this was from Ingrid in China. She's going to Kona. So you got to go aero, but you got to go breathable. Personally, I'll tell you what I used, having been there 3 times. My recent one, I used a Cosk Bambino helmet. So it's obviously an aero helmet without ventilation. It wasn't super stifling because you need to be, there's a cost benefit here between going super aero, but then your head is cooking because that's where you dissipate most of your heat. And that's the biggest problem for carbohydrate management and core temperature is, of course, your body heat. We know that. There's not very good cooling in Kona. So something like the Gyro Aerohead, the Cosk Bambino Pro, or even the Specialized Evade, which I used many years before that. So it's a road helmet, but you've got to test it in the sun, not in your hallway or in your in the bike turbo. So next question, do you find qualifying for world champs impressive? I wonder if this has a double little sarcasm. So the short answer is yes, but not because of the result, because of what it takes to sacrifice. We're talking age groupers, but then there's also professional athletes. And having been around the professional scene, I know what they have to do. And it's actually now in the last 5 years becoming, I'm going to say almost impossible, but just brutal from a cost perspective for professionals. So let's talk about the amateurs. Most amateurs juggle work. You can relate to that. Some of them have kids and they're high achievers. That I find really impressive because you've got to not only get to these races or this travel, you've got to compete now. The age group world is becoming, in the last 3 years, unbelievably competitive. It always used to be competitive and we aspire to be the fastest perhaps in our age group. But it used to be, 35, 39, and then there used to be a bit of a drop off from 45. Now it's all the way into the 50s. The level is, 9 hours still at that. So I find that impressive actually qualifying if that's the goal and your body can get to that point and handle the volume of training, the 14, 16, 18 hour weeks relentlessly for most of the year. That's what I find impressive. I respect that more than the actual slot because a lot of people qualify, but they don't take it because they aren't on that journey. And I actually respect that a lot. Question 6, single chainring or double for Kona. I think it's called a 1x and the rear cluster. Okay. Now, I reckon if you ask quite a few different aerodynamic experts in this, and I'm not one, but I listen to the likes of certain individuals, like a direct yes, 1x chainring. That's basically a big chainring in the front with a selection of gears. Personally, I know I'll tell you what I use, and it's more of a road setup gear-wise. For about 90-95% of triathletes, a double chainring for Kona is probably your best bet. I'll tell you why. There's rolling hills. It's not a very hard course. It's not very hilly. Rolling, as you know, you've seen coverage. It's the headwind on the climb, which you never know. Normally towards Harvey, the turnaround, you've always got a head. It's pretty much guaranteed. And a tailwind home, if you're lucky, down the hill. So on the way up, if you're pushing a big chain ring and you don't have the correct cassette at the back, which is generally either 1128 or 1130, and you're trying to push a big gear up front, you're going to munch those quads. So if you're a strength athlete, you could probably get by with that. Personally, I'll be a 5339 and I'll use my small chainring up that climb into the headwind, but of course further down the back, and I ride a 1130 on the back and 11 speed, but now 12 speed is obviously being out. So it's not mountainous, but it's the headwinds and it's the nature of the course. dictates that you have to be as fresh as possible to run. It's not a swim and bike race, more so than any other Ironman. I really can't advocate that even more. Conversely, on the way back down, I know I ran out of gears, not because I push a big gear. 53.11 is almost not enough when you're spinning out. So you'll see the guys ride a 55, one by 56, some of the strong bikers, but they can push that tolerance. They have high torque. They are very good cyclists. If you are slightly middle of the pack, as in average strength cyclist, I ride 5 hours, 5.7 in my last Kona. I'm not an Uber biker. I probably couldn't push that power, that big chain ring. So you see how contextual that is. Question 7, best way to improve on the bike. Another whole video for that. I'll give you a quick answer. More time in position. What does that mean? You've got, most triathletes have a road bike and a time trial bike. Some of us are aspiring to get a TT bike. If you do a lot of your training on a road bike and then try and push out the power in a triathlon and stay fairly low, you just low on the bike. You're just not going to improve in terms of time because of your body being the biggest aerodynamic drag. If you already have a time trial bike and you are riding a little bit out on the road, a little bit on the turbo, but you don't really shy away from the TT bars, which I know I've done, because it's harder and the power drops 10, 15%, you're better off spending, 80% of your time, the closer you get to the event, in your time trial position, because it's not about chasing power, it's about holding speed. But if you can't hold 80, 90% of the time in that position, you're throwing it all away. So the 10 grand bike, subpar bike fit, and not being able to hold that position, this is key, guys. Best way to improve your bike is that improve bike splits in an Ironman, or generally to improve your bike. The other way to also improve it, well, you need to do a deep dive into lab testing to see where your holes are. Whether you're a professional athlete, you will have holes in your physiology and they need to be addressed in the right time of the year. So 2 different answers there. And specificity. So biggest games come from, working backwards from an event, so reverse engineering, consistency, pacing discipline. So for a race, you're probably not pacing yourself. Short events, really easy to pace. Long events, it's an art. It took me over a decade to get the pacing right and have that confidence to just hold back. Okay, so start chasing your control rather than power splits. Question 8, are aero wheels worth it? Well, 100%. If your budget allows it, yes. Your biggest gains nowadays come from wheels and tri-suits. There's a bit of jury out around the dimples. We know you get quite a few watts from the dimples, but aero wheels are 100%, 2.5 grand on a set of wheels. Then you're thinking about a disc. Excluding Kona, most courses you can use a disc. It is faster. 100%. It's the bearings in the hubs. They're very important. Again, the yaw angle, the ability, the body, the wind direction hitting the wheels, and then the tire selection are very crucial. So generally most people are hitting 28s, riding 28s, tubeless, going wider. I remember the days where we used to ride 23s. 25 was a big deal. It's 28 now with those Uber bikers. So they reduce drag, especially over 30 Ks an hour. Your fundamental issue is your body position, your head, your upper body for speed. So, I wouldn't put a 2 grand pair of wheels or 2.5 grand on a $20 bike fit. Do you know what I mean? So if you haven't sorted your bike position and your upper body and what's going on, you've got to, I'd prioritize the engine first and then speed second. Or should I say that? Prioritize your engine first and your position first, and then get onto the wheels and helmet and tri-suit if that follows sense. Question 9, I always have gut problems. So I've done a whole video on this. On the run, need to stop to poop, help. That's why I said I knew these would get a little bit personal, and everyone's had these problems, 100%. Okay, so it's brutal, but it's super common. It generally, of course, happens on the run. The result is the run, but that's the outcome, but it's generally the bike, guys and girls. It's always on the bike that causes the problem. It's a buffet for the run. The bike. So it's usually a mix of too much fiber the day before, over fueling with sugars, fairly obvious on the bike. Disruptiveness between sodium intake, could be just a little, or sometimes you need more, and carbohydrate. So they work hand in hand. You need to look now at both, and it's becoming more streamlined. Thanks to these guys, they link with Ironman now. Ironman realize we need Bolton fueling. Precision does the hydration. There's a link between hydration and fuel. Body needs sodium to operate. So you've got to simplify your pre-race dinner as well, certainly for the 2 days before. And I would speak to a sort of a gut health pro if you really have some other issues in training, or you are going to the toilet too much, so you have a bit of a leaky gut syndrome. Because when you're racing, you're under huge inflammation, and if you have issues day to day, that'll become much worse in the race day. So it's a whole video, but I do actually have months ago, I've done a scroll through some of my fueling and hydration videos. You'll learn quite a bit there. Question 10, do I need a high, this is a great question. Do I need a high VO2 max to go pro or qualify for worlds? No, but it helps. Okay. So VO2, it shows your potential, VO2, maximum volume of oxygen uptake. So we look at high-level Olympic athletes, runners, 80 plus VO2 max. There's some chat around Christian Blumenfeld's VO2 being very high, like exceptionally 90 odd plus. Let's exclude that for a number of reasons, but it's not essential. And to quote a very well-known physiologist, Dr. Dan Plews, who I've done a lot of studying with, actually for Ironman, you don't necessarily need a very high VO2 max. It helps give you a range for your training zones. It helps you work at a percentage of your VO2 max. So this is going to get a little bit nitty. You're better off having a higher percentage, so 70, 75% of utilization. For example, it's at steady state zone 2 or fat max, or your first turn point of your VO2 max. If you are sitting at 50% of your VO2 max is say 400 watts, you are going to run out of energy in an Ironman, not so much in a half, where a high VO2 max will help you because of your threshold, directly correlated. But it's about context. So if you dig deeper, you do need a relatively high VO2 max to become a professional athlete. Jan Frodeno, another case, he, and quoted by his coach, Daniel Lorang, famous, really nice German, he was like, look, when he looked at Jan's numbers back in the day, and you can listen to a podcast on this, his VO2 max, his numbers, when they talk about that, weren't very impressive. He is just clearly very efficient and very resilient. So yes, personally, I don't have a high VO2 max. From memory, 60s, my bike is just borderline 59, 60. So run will be a bit higher due to more muscles being used and higher volume of oxygen uptake to power on. So context, it really depends. It's not essential is the answer to that. You don't need a lab number just to tell you your outcomes, but you need a plan, a coach, and a body that can absorb work over time, and it's the year upon year. You can raise your VO2 still through your 40s. Theoretically at 35 onwards it starts to decline, but if you use it, you don't lose it, and you can still raise things up. So yes, I would urge you to maintain your VO2 max training. That's a wrap on all your questions and answers for today. If you like that, please click subscribe. Shoot me a message or an email if you really want to do a strategic call around your performance, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks.